I have mixed feelings about going to the eye doctor. I do not like the part where the doctor puts those drops in your eyes that dilate your pupils and you're basically blind for the rest of the day. I once went to the eye clinic by myself and had that done. The drive home was kind of interesting, to say the least. On the other hand, my favorite part of the eye exam is where they have you look through those binocular-like thingamajigs at the chart on the other side of the room, and the doctor asks, do you see the chart better with A? Then she flips the lens, or B, or A. Or maybe your doc gives you the choice between 1 or 2. And little by little, your choices of A over B or B over A results in, oh my gosh, I can see clearly now. Now that little experience we all go through at the eye doctor is a lot like the spiritual life. In fact, if you study the stories of Jesus and his disciples, many of them are about transformations that take place in people's lives as Jesus plays the role of spiritual optometrist and fine-tunes our vision by flipping the lenses of life, A or B or A. And little by little, folks get to the point where they joyfully say, I once was blind, but now which is exactly what the man says in today's reading from John 9. Here is a story about a free eye exam. Jesus offers it to a whole bunch of people suffering with spiritual cataracts and astigmatisms and macular degeneration and nearsightedness and farsightedness and even congenital blindness. There is the man who was born blind. There are the religious leaders who cannot see the forest for the trees. There are the parents of the blind man who see the dire consequences that will come if they speak up. And there are the neighbors who can't accept that the man has been healed because they still think of him as the blind boy from down the street. All these are offered Jesus' eye exam. Oh, and us too. You and me. We're there, too, in the exam room together with all these folks from Bible days, looking through those binocular-like thingamajigs and being asked to choose between A or B or A. And the story poses these choices in some very interesting and provocative ways. First of all, what do you see when you look out at the world and other people? A, all that's wrong, sin, sinfulness, or B, hope and promise. Now, the disciples of Jesus were like many of us. They were raised in a culture that saw sin just about everywhere it looked. There are the obvious sins, of course, the bad things people do. Just open the newspaper or turn on the news on TV and you'll get your fill of that. But along with all that are the misfortunes that people experience in life. Many of us understand these tragic experiences to be the result of people's sins. So the followers of Jesus asked, what caused this guy to be born blind? His sin or the sins of his parents? Now, this is a very interesting and revealing question. In asking if this man was born blind because of some sin he committed, you might ask, how can you commit a sin before you are born? Do you see the problem with that question? The man was born blind. Why? What did he do to cause that to happen? The disciples wanted to know. Well, in fact, the religion of that day believed exactly that it was possible to sin in utero. It was the only way they could make sense of things like birth defects and stillborn babies. Bad things happen because of sin, they believe. So either the parents were guilty of sinning or the fetus sinned from within his mother's womb. Listen to these words from Psalm 51 that provide the basis for this belief. Surely I was sinful at birth, says the psalmist, sinful from the time my mother conceived me, yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb. So this man must have done something displeasing to God, something unfaithful when he was still just a muffin baking in the oven, so to speak. Besides, miracles sometimes don't happen when sin has been committed, parents committed a sin, and now, according to the belief of this system, God was punishing them by blinding the baby. How do you see that? A or B? True or not true? We Christians have an interesting version of this same belief. It's called the doctrine of original sin. It holds that all babies are born stained by sin. And the most popular version of this doctrine teaches that the stain is passed down through the act of sexual intercourse that transpires between the parents and conceives the child. And it all started back with Adam and Eve. Remember them? They sinned. They ate the fruit God told them not to eat. They were stained by sin. And then they passed the stain on to their children. And the children passed the stain on to their children. And so on and so on and so on, right down to my almost brand new spanking, bouncing grandbaby Elijah up in Lexington, Kentucky, who sits there fat, dumb, and happy in his mother's arms and hasn't got a clue about any of this. And that's why in some Christian traditions, we've got to get that baby baptized as fast as possible, just in case, God forbid, it were to die without washing the stain away. A or B? What do you see? Sin and sinfulness or hope and promise? It makes a difference, you know. Now here's where the story gets interesting. The man who was born blind has experienced a miracle. Jesus healed him, and now he sees. And Jesus declared that it was neither his sin nor his parents' sin that caused the blindness. No. You see, stuff happens in this world. And some of it is hard and tragic and sad. Why does it happen? We don't know. And whenever we try to explain it, we seem to come up with really stupid ideas that usually place the blame on the victims. Have you ever noticed that? We love to blame the victims for the things that are going on in their lives. So Jesus doesn't try to explain it. He just says that God is at work transforming the brokenness of life into wholeness, and this guy is a living example of the glory of God healing his children. So the man goes home and joyfully tells his neighbors the great news about this healing. How exciting, how wonderful. And do you remember what they say? You can't be the blind boy who grew up down the street. You may look like him, but you can't be him because that would be a miracle. And we all know that miracles don't happen to sinful people like you. Besides, miracles are just what ignorant people believe in. A lot of people think that way, but let me ask you, A or B? Miracles or no miracles? What do you see? So the neighbors bring the man down to the church. And you know what happens when hope and promise come to church, right? They get thrown right out the door, excommunicated. You see, religious institutions thrive on guilt and shame. Panic sets in when God's grace comes through the door. Love and acceptance set people free to think differently about everything, including sin and rejection. And sin and rejection, along with guilt and shame, are the tools churches use to exert control over people. I know a young man who, as a boy, was sexually abused by a clergy person. So were a bunch of other kids in the church. As shocking as this may be, what is even more shocking is that the parents of the boys knew. But they were afraid. They were afraid to stand up and go forward. They were afraid of challenging authority. They were afraid of ruining a man's sacred vocation, something they were reminded of every Sunday. They were afraid of being excommunicated for bringing charges against one of God's servants. And without excusing these parents, we still need to understand them. Churches are institutionally fortified against challenges and even questions. You know what happened to Martin Luther when he posted 59 challenges on the doors of the church at Wittenberg. You know what happened to Galileo when he argued that the earth revolves around the sun rather than the other way around as taught by the church of his day. You know what happened when people in this country stood up against slavery and later segregation that was declared by many churches to be a God-ordained institution and proved it by referring to the Bible. You know what happened when Maria Harris was ordained the first female priest in her denomination. And when she became a bishop, oh my. You know what happens even today when people stand up against religious intolerance and go against the grain of the religious status quo. Churches don't like grace so much. We don't like grace. We like rules. We like doctrines. We like sacraments. Because we can use rules, doctrines, and sacraments to conform people to our values. And we often do that under the threat of spending an eternity in hell if they don't. So they bring the once blind man to church, and the meeting does not go well. In verse 34, the encounter ends with these words of the church leaders to the man born blind, but who now sees, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out of the church. Imagine that. Here's a guy newly alive and on fire for God because he's experienced the miracle of healing, and the church throws him out. The church has lost a lot of good people that way. A or B? True or not true? You see, how you see God, how you see people, and how you see the world makes a huge difference. Once a long time ago, God sent the prophet Samuel to find the person who would become the next king over Israel. He went to a little obscure village called Bethlehem, to the house of a man named Jesse. Now, Jesse had 8 sons, and God told Samuel he had chosen one of them to become the next king. So Samuel had the sons of Jesse pass in front of him. First came Eliab. When he saw him, Samuel thought, "This is the one." But God said, "Nope." Next came Abinadab, big and strong. But, nope, he's not the one either. Next came Shammah, and then the others of Jesse's sons. But as wonderful and accomplished and skillful as they were, none of them was the man God chose. The Lord told Samuel, "Do not consider their appearance or their height. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Samuel asked Jesse if he has any other sons. "Yes, my youngest, but he's out tending the sheep. Bring him here." And so he did. The boy was ruddy and handsome, but still, he was a kid. And just then God spoke to Samuel. This is the one. And Samuel saw clearly what God saw. David grew up to be the greatest and most beloved king of Israel, despite his many flaws and sins, and there were more of those than you can count. You see, where you and I may see all that's wrong with ourselves and others, all that's broken and weak, all that's frail and fallen, God sees us differently. Where we see sin and sinfulness, God sees hope and promise. Many years after David had gone home to God, one of his descendants and a pregnant teenage girl, as mismatched and unlikely a couple as you can imagine, journeyed to David's hometown of Bethlehem to be enrolled in a census. While they were there, a baby was born to them, and his cries, some claim, sounded like a choir of angels singing in the hills of Bethlehem. Ragged groups of shepherds came along, and so did some mysterious visitors from the east. Not exactly the folks you'd expect to be invited to the birthday party of the Savior of the world. How do you see God? How do you see others? How do you see yourself? Being a Christian means going through a lifelong process of opening your eyes to things you've never seen before. And it is Jesus who is not just our spiritual optometrist. No, he is the very lens through which we who are blind begin to see. Whoosh.